Okay. Hello, everybody at the Joyce. Thank you for joining us for another edition of the JoyceStream Artist Talkbacks. We are here today to celebrate the Trisha Brown Dance Company's 50th anniversary season, which was meant to play the week of April 21st, opening night. So we are live streaming for a brief period of time a film by Burt Barr called Eros, which traces a part of the development of Astral Convertible. And we are also, the company has shared with us Groove and Countermove, which was performed at the Joyce previously. And this discussion today focuses on Eros. And we are joined by three of the original cast, also three of the original in the film. And I'll just have them introduce themselves. Carolyn, we can start with you.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Lucas, and I'm an associate artistic director of the company.
I'm Diane Madden, and I'm artistic consultant for the Trisha Brown Company.
And I'm Lance Gries, and I danced with the company from 1985 to 1991. And in the months prior to the Joyce dates, I was helping Carolyn rehearse the company for both pieces that were going to be on the program.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you all for joining us, and thank you to the company for sharing a part of your archive with us in the audience. It's been really nice to still have the opportunity to sit with Trisha's work. And happy 50th anniversary to everyone in the family. So I wanted to start by talking about the film itself, which I think is such its own object that's documenting a process and a relationship and also a dance, but is really, I think, metaphorically like reflecting on some of what the dance is also getting at, I think. So, you know, there's three things that I want to, like, the film starts with a pressure washing of a facade of a theater, or I'm assuming it's a theater, the theater.
It's a building across the street from 541 Broadway.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Which is where Trisha's studio was.
Yes, still is. And I think he probably was able to shoot it just from the window of his apartment, probably.
Amazing.
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought it was like the Monet. I don't know why.
Why not?
Yeah. So it starts with this pressure washing, like cleaning up, preparing something. And I think the whole film is documenting this process of getting ready. And then there's also this beautiful woman hand sweeping the stage with this tiny broom. And then the other thing that stood out to me outside of the documentation of the dance is those close-ups, the stills of the monuments, just like these like big structural bodies. And to me, it immediately was like, okay, the muscled quality of the dancing, which, having just talked about Set and Reset a couple of days ago, feels like so much different. There's so much labor and construction in this. And I wonder if each of you could kind of respond to that, whether it's yes, no, you're crazy, that's exactly it, or whatever. But I really felt like also the labor of dancing, the dancers as laborers. So I'll just let that start us off.
I'll just start by saying that statue that you're referring to is the first man in space, which, is as much as it's also, I feel like the way Burt shot the dancers in the slow motion and the close up, it makes us look kind of heroic.
Yeah.
And so there is this heroic looking statue, first man in space, and also Trisha's desire to fly.
Mm-hmm.
And the man this is in Moscow. That image is shot in Moscow. So, and it is the second part of her like historic cycle. This piece was the second piece in the cycle that you call the heroic cycle.
Yeah, the Valiant cycle.
Valiant. I always call it heroic. I thought we were heroes.
It's the third, isn't it? Sorry, it's Lateral Pass, Newark, and then AC.
And so even a lot of the material inside the work, like the men's material, she was calling us superheroes, and we were like creating these big graphic shapes of pushing through the space, like literally like superheroes. A lot of them are very literal, in fact.
Also, the pressure washer to me brings to mind the tower design and technology, the sort of analog.
Yeah.
We were talking about this the other night, how they were run on car batteries, cassette tapes. Yeah, pretty headlights. Yeah.
And I think it's so kind of not ironic, but there's the little clip of homemade, in the work, which is, I think, suggestive, even though I think it was on the program in one of our cities, but I feel like it's there for a real purpose to give us that analog feeling that, this is low tech, this is still homemade, this is still within the stylistic concerns of Bob, which was never really truly slick, it was always had a little showing the workings of the work. I totally agree. Like the workers, like I really felt like this, like he's showing the dance and the dancers as laborers. That's, you said the word completely, I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, it's I also loved it. I felt like I saw some of Newark in there. In one of the duets, there was some lift, and I was like, oh my God, that either reflects forward or quotes backwards, but like it looks so the word has escaped me like all day, but it's still much more linear than some of the other stuff, and so muscled. Like you guys do really feel when I think Bert is allowing that to happen also through his sound. There's just like thuds and breathing, and you see sweat, like that section where it's like the bowels section, and people are just sweating, and it's kind of like the sound is distorted, like there's no audience, but it's just like it's really a piece of art that's in response to and reflecting this whole collaboration. So I think let's talk about Robert Rauschenberg, because the whole reason that we've focused on Eros is that the Joyce season was meant to be a celebration of the collaboration between Trisha and Robert. So what can you guys tell us as witnesses to that collaboration, specifically about this, in terms of like the building of those structures? Was that something that, did Trisha just give Robert carte blanche? Was it like, I don't know, just do something? Or were they really talking about like?
I think Lance and Di have memories of this, but I think she was really interested in getting on a tour circuit, both for financial reasons and romantic reasons. So it was, this tour was like open air, no theater support production wise. So it's written in a book that she called Rauschenberg and said, can you make an inflatable set? And he was like, no, but I can make you 8, towers, 2, 4, 6, 8 feet. I think that's it. And they'll just contain all that we need inside them, the lighting, the sound. And so he just came back with this brilliant idea.
Like about self-containment, just like lights and tights. Let's hit the road.
Yes, exactly. And we did. Yeah. A lot of eras, a lot of the stuff that it looks like we're in a marsh or something in Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Atlantic Center for the Arts, and we were in a residency there, and there were open rehearsals, and that was a transitional period for the set from moving indoors to out. So I think it was responding and reacting a little bit differently, and I think they were really, you know, working to problem solve. And one of my favorite things today when I watched Eros was there's a moment where I think people are a bit exasperated from trying to problem solve, and you see Trisha and Bob and Pear just sitting there, and we're just sort of like gears down the, you know, the speed, and then you just hear like these mosquitoes just like
Yes.
I so appreciated that today. It was so great.
I did too.
It was a new thrill for me today. I was just
The mosquito. I have it written down. And there's also a moment, Carolyn, when you're in slow motion and it goes like, the sound comes out of your mouth. Like it's. There's a lot of little moments like that where he's like really putting the focus on the oddities of the environment. I'll just talk a little bit. Just, you know, we had just come back from a tour because Rauschenberg had been doing part of his Rocky traveling show, which is Rauschenberg's Overseas Cultural Interchange. And so the first place I ever went out of the United States was to Beijing.
I brought a picture. Can I
in
show
1985. You know, it's like the first travel I ever did ever. That's on the Great Wall of China. Wow. But we had been traveling with Bob, you know, like, and it was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And what I just wrote down, I remember, like, you know, for then, Trisha was like just another gal in the studio somehow. I mean, we knew she was brilliant. We knew that she was like this genius, but we were also dancing with her every day. And so she was so much fun, and you know, I don't know. And so, but when Bob entered the picture, that's when I would step back and go, oh, wow, yeah. She, you know, like, this is something beyond just like Trisha coming and dancing with us. So I don't know. I just had that memory. Like, it was always a huge thrill to be in Bob's presence.
Yeah.
And,
very generous, and I feel like he loved dance more than anybody I met, and was always very supportive of the dancers too. And you know, he adored Trisha, but he made sure to you know, make connections with us, and was super generous person.
He was really exciting to be around, and the relationship that he and Trisha had was, as everyone's describing, immensely loving, but also, you know, could withstand friction. And I think some of that is captured in Eros, you know, that they could kind of, you know, rub up against each other and create, you know, push each other a little bit. And it was, I mean, it was a beautiful dialogue between the two of them. And just one other thing about Bob that I would always be grateful for, you know, he had no, socially at least, he had no editing capability. He said what he felt. He wore his heart on his sleeve, and if he did not like you, he let you know it for whatever reasons. And if he cared for you as he did the dancers and Trisha, he let you know it. And fortunately, we were in the latter group because it was a bit scary sometimes to watch him lay into people that he didn't necessarily admire or respect.
Well, there's that beautiful moment where they're struggling with communication around something, and Trisha is trying to like interrupt into Bob speaking, and then she just holds his hand and waits, and somebody else talks, and then she's like, well, let me talk, and she just continues. And it's like they're communicating. It's in tech. Like, tech is so frustrating, and there's so much impatience and struggle because you're like, I know what I want it to look like, and sometimes you don't know how to talk about the thing you need it to be. It's just like, I don't know, the lights are wrong. They were different yesterday, they're different today, the music was different, like, we don't know that. And she just holds his hand, and it's so clear that like they are holding space for each other, but also just like getting through it. They're working it out, but it's such a like a gesture of generosity, and like I honor you in this space, but also like the process is mine, but you're here with me. The process is ours, but like let me take this on. It's really nice.
Not to mention, like, they're being filmed and there's an audience. I think that night watching them, it was just like how chaotic could it get?
Yeah. So Carolyn, you were saying that I had made the, I guess, assumption that this was all recorded in one location as we were prepping for like the premiere of something, but you were actually saying that the film represents a trajectory of the piece coming from one to another, and that there's actually a number of locations within the film. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
I think within, not all of the performances were there, but like our first performance was concurrent with the Rauschenberg Overseas Cultural Interchange for short. And so it was a preview of Astral Convertible. So I think that the sets were just not positioned the same way as the premiere, but they were getting it going. And then another featured place is the Atlantic Center. So we're making that transition outside. And then June of '89, we're in Montpellier in this gorgeous theater, outdoor theater that we've been at before, I think a couple of times. And so we were performing there, and Bert did a lot of the shoot for Eros there. And then sometime in September '89, it's at the World Financial Center. And that night we had performed GPA on rafts in the boat marina at the Winter Garden, and then come up on, changed in the like public bathrooms into the Unitards all seasick, and then went out on the deck to do Astral Convertible. And then I think it's not necessarily a focus of Eros yet, but then the last stage of the Rocky exhibit, it finished at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and that's where
Astral
Converted premiered. So
I think that I see this thing about these different locations, indoors, outdoors, like Moscow. Actually, the courtyard where we were performing in Montpellier is where I last saw you, Erin.
Oh,
yeah,
that's where I last saw you.
Yeah,
that's 2 summers ago. But I was listening and watching very closely today. You know, you talked about the sound score, or like the sound environment. It's so important because there's overlap. For example, there's a sound for each location. In Montpellier, there's French speaking. In New York, there's the sprayer. In Florida, it's the insects and the frogs. And sometimes he's literally like showing footage from Montpellier, but the sound of Moscow is behind it. Because in Moscow, it's like the wind and stuff. And he's overlaying different sound locations on the physical locations. And I think that there's, for me, that combined with this, like, showing the workers, you know, like the pedestrian people, there's like this, for me, there's like really this sense of dislocating the dance, and like, you know, and the dancers, and we just become another part of this kind of, this like labor environment or something. I really like that, but the sound score is really key to this kind of dislocation for me.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Carolyn.
So clear, because right from the start, that becomes established with the sound of the water, you know, against the facade, and then that's how it's carried when you see the first shot in Montpellier of Diane in the solo. It's gorgeous. And then also the birds too. I love the birds. The swallows would just always be circling above that open theater in Montpellier.
All the slow motion towards the end has Moscow sound behind it, but it's filmed in Montpellier. It's Montpellier stage.
Diane, that opening solo is so beautiful and so kind of like twisted and torqued, but then the camera angle changes and it looks so perfectly of the body, like as it's like
Do it.
but can you guys talk about the experience of working with Bert, because it's clear that he's on stage with you or so close to you, and was it that he was just kind of filming and trying to stay out of your way in runs of the piece, or was he kind of controlling the environment and saying, Carolyn, do that again, you know, there's one moment where it kind of breaks out of performance and someone speaks.
Diane, he laughs. She said,
Diane will.
Yeah.
I cracked up. I thought it was the end of the shot, and I turned around and I was like, I'm done.
Yeah. So what was like, how did that get filmed, all of that?
You know, I'm not, you guys, are you remembering the cameras in our faces? I'm not so much. I think it was just a whole lot of repetition, but we did that anyways.
Right.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
and I think, like, I remember at the World Financial Center, they had because they were with the company, so to speak, they had the ability to get right up beside the stage. So I do sort of remember people filming on the perimeter of the stage, also in Smyrna Beach. But the shoot in Montpellier was it was an event. It was a very long night, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe a couple of nights.
I think it was a few nights, yeah. And that photo, it was great to see that photo. See, like, oh yeah, there was that guy. I remember that person. I would never have remembered.
Mm-hmm. So Lance, you said you started in '85. So was this the first process or second process that you had been involved with in terms of?
The first was Lateral Pass.
Okay, so you started at the beginning of
I started at the beginning of Lateral Pass, and then
you started as a hero.
Yes.
Yes. But I learned very early on all of Stephen's roles, so I was also a unstable molecule.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just going to say something about Bert's general demeanor as a person in the orbit of Trisha and Bob and us. He was such a gentle, soft presence that he could be right behind your shoulder, you know, and Bert.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's a quality of that in the film, and I think there's, you know, even Trisha acknowledges that at times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it somehow feels it's so natural.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's almost handheld, like he's just right there with you. It doesn't feel like he's outside observing. It really it's a very trusted source, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think he has like a very daily inside perspective, you know, because the studio was part of the loft, and it was, you know, he was very close to Trisha's work. So I think he's a beautiful, I mean, his work is gorgeous. I love his other video works also. He has a really good sense of, I don't know, he has this very unique style, but also with a sense of humor, which is great. Dry, but funny.
Yeah. I want to pick up something, Lance, that you said about molecules, because I was thinking about the physical language of AC as compared to my recent experience seeing Set and Reset in the studio in January. And I was thinking as I was watching Eros, like Set and Reset, somehow the dancers, it's like if you looked at a microscope of a slide of like a pond, like a couple of drops of pond water or something. There's just action everywhere. And this feels also with Newark, which is one of my favorite dances, it feels almost like constructivist or like brutalist. Like I'm thinking about architecture. It makes me think about lines and like how things are built. And like, I'm having a really hard time.
You're very close to all of it.
Okay, but will you guys talk about those two periods, because they are pretty close in time?
Yeah, I mean, I used the language of unstable molecular structure because that is actually how Trisha talked about the pieces prior to that. Son of Gone Fishing, Set and Reset, and Opal Loop. Unstable molecular series. And then I entered on Lateral Pass, which became like her Valiant series, as Carolyn noted it. I forgot to say, of course, between Lateral Pass and Astral Convertible was New Work, which was really where I got into the process heavily. And, you know, I was a guy, and the guys were starting to become important. And exactly what you said, like Trisha I mean, it's kind of quoted in other sources, like she was tired of being described as the water words, slippery, slick, slidey, or like all the water words. And so, you know, that was one of the impulses to like slow the material down so people could really see it and have to sit with it more, you know, more profoundly, you know, and shift a little bit the responsibility, I think, of the language. And so there's also like very clearly in the beginning of New Work, this long duet that the men do in unison. The imagery is furniture, you know, it's like, it's solid, it's architectural. You know, I think of Donald Judd's furniture.
Yeah.
Totally Donald Judd's furniture, which I just had the chance to see up at MoMA. You know, they presented all of his handmade furniture along with his sculptures, and it's so clear, you know, and he happens to also be the designer for the work. And yeah, that's really the trajectory, you know.
It's like, it's almost like, you know, because people felt or look at something like Set and Reset and feel like it's improvised, that there's improvisation or something, and it's absolutely not. It's almost like she's saying, let me show you the mechanics. Like, I'll prove to you that this is all built. One of my favorite moments in the film is, Diane, it might be you on the ground. Sorry, I'm not great at the identification of dancers, but you're sitting and a man puts his foot here and then there's like something, it's like, it's exactly what you're saying, Lance. It's like, slowing it down so you can really see the mechanics of the partnering, and it's so delightful. And there's also, I wrote down collision. There's that moment where somebody jumps up and somebody just like knocks them into a lift.
There's also a beautiful moment where, and Bert being brilliant, I think we see it 3 times, bang, 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 where Will slams into Carolyn and they back up off.
I scoop around.
Yeah, it's in the midst of this whole vortex of activity. But yeah, so the partnering, there's also an extraordinary duet between Greg Lara and Lisa Schmidt called Glue Duet. And you get a nice intimate view of that, very cause and effect. Well, it's interesting because Lisa's she has more phrase material, and Greg is interfering with it, really supporting it and interfering with it, and what they end up with is extraordinary.
Just like what you're talking about is like Trisha really conscientiously like pushing vocabulary forward, slowing it down, and then taking another step forward with it in sometimes different ways depending on what she wants to work with. So in New Work, she had these guys like very solidly placed, literally as scenography. She talked about us as we were being the scenography. And we were like furniture, and we were placed, and we were solid, we were very square, and once in a while we do that, once in a while we do that, once in a while we do that. And then you get to Astral Convertible, and all of a sudden the 4 men are doing this, like we're galumphing along in basically these same shapes, kind of, or these same functions, but with a lot of energy and force projected into diagonals. It's
also a lot more fluidity. In a way, it sort of harkens back to the fluidity in Set and Reset, because
combined with this
extremely long cantilevered bodies powering through the space, but there's also a real fluidity that comes back.
Yeah. It's as a dancer, if you are like following, what's the word am I trying to think? Yeah, vocabulary, ontological sense or whatever, you know, like kind of like following a thought process, it's all there for you to work with.
Mm-hmm. So what's the progression of astral convertible to astral converted? And then the language that you're using now, like I would love to talk about the reconstruction of the piece for the just live performance and the Joyce season, but beyond that everywhere, and just how the piece changed and evolved and how you all work with language and the imagery that you use to not just reconstruct the steps, because that can sometimes be the easier part. It's more about the performance and sort of getting people into the presence of the dance, which is something very specific, which is why we have reconstruction and people from original cast come back to say, like, this is not that version, this is this time. How has the piece evolved? What is the difference between convertible and converted, and how are you guys all coming together to rebuild this for an audience?
Carolyn, do you want to go first?
Yeah, it's sort of amazing so one thing that was really special about choosing this partner, you know, collaborative relationship to celebrate at the 50th was that Trisha and Bob started to work. It's not the beginning, but they were working on Astral Convertible, which was the end of the Valiant cycle. The next foray, which was the beginning of the Back to Zero cycle. And then apparently Trisha and Bob were asked to do another collaboration, freestanding outdoors, for the National Gallery of Art, but they thought it would be amazing to extend Astral Convertible and make it a 55-minute piece. And so she added these gorgeous sections of choreography, and they worked a lot on the towers so that they could be moved. In convertible, they would kind of go haywire if you touch them. So you could move them into the space or take them away as a dancer's coming. And I think there was a sort of an idea that in the outdoor spaces, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that, you know, there was, I think, a fantasy, or no, like a dream that they could alter the space of each place. But I think that we pretty much kept the same pattern in the end. There was that sort of desire to do what you want. And I mean, Lance and Diane built some really beautiful extensions that it would be great if they could talk about. Lance built a solo, Diane, there was the brooms material, and then you guys built the big quartet that is so beautiful. And just before we go on, one of my favorite, I mean, I love all of Trisha's work so much, but sometimes certain phrase material, just like, it's like, oh my God, it's just, I just still love it so much. And Lance and Diane, one of my all-time favorite things is material that they do from the Grubby Duet.
Really?
It's just like, so it's so sculptural, but it's moving, so it never really, like, there's like this amazing kind of like elasticity to it, even though it's very sculptural and geometric. And that's when, at the beginning of Eros, Diana is doing a section of that material in that solo form. But I love it. Sorry.
That's nice, Carolyn.
One of the things that got added in, and I think I read somewhere that, you know, Trisha said, oh, like, how wonderful to get to go back into one of your works and add things, you know. I mean, oftentimes she would premiere something, she would finish it and premiere it, and then do, you know, once she sees it on stage, then she gets back in there and does a little bit of tweaking. But this is like big big additions to it. And yeah.
I forgot to say something major. I also asked John Cage to write the music for Astral Converted. So some things shifted. So
yeah, that's a big addition also. But yeah, so one of the sections that got developed was this brooms material. So that's in Astral Converted. And there's also this extraordinary phrase that's called the floor phrase, where Trisha went into exploring this realm that wasn't standing, but it also wasn't lying down. So you're on your feet, but you're somehow inhabiting this low level. And I think there was a whole new way of moving that came from developing that vocabulary, a whole new way of levering from the floor and suspending and supporting yourself and counterbalancing in your body. Sorry, I'm sort of rambling now. But yeah, I wanted to say brooms is, it's this, it's sort of, for me, captures this experience I had of around the same time that we were doing Astral Convertible. We also went back and did some early work reconstructions, and we reconstructed lineup. And the experience of going back to those very, very simple pared down works and understanding as a performer how legible your intention becomes in that very pure work, and bringing that into these more complex virtuosic works, to me, was one of the most enriching experience I had as a performer. So I have to say, I do love teaching brooms to new dancers, and the specificity of simply moving a broom around in relationship to another dancer's movement, and the kind of calm, clear focus that you need to have to do that. I love passing that on to dancers.
And where did those brooms come from? Like,
we're not really sure.
Trisha's had a thing for brooms for a long time.
Oh, that's right. That's right. The broom story. This right. Who remembers how this story goes? Where she's on Anna Halprin's deck, improvising. Do you know this, Aaron?
I've just been on that deck.
You were there. You could tell the story.
There's a famous photograph of Trisha like sweeping so hard that it lifts her body up off the floor, and she's like kind of flying off the end of the broom.
It's like taking task to its.
Taking task.
Yeah.
And Diane, you're really talking about like the roots of so much of Trisha's work is the quality of like exploring task, up through virtuosity. And so in Astral Converted, you really have both ends of this. You have the broom pushers, and then you have this solo of like 8 minutes that Trisha and I made, which is the last thing I made for Trisha, with Trisha. And it is the most technical, difficult thing I've ever done in my life, and it's the last thing I've ever done like that. And you really have this huge range of, from task simplicity up to huge sweeping material that's spinning and articulating over and over again, and I just was going to think, like, when you asked about like working with the dancers, this new group of dancers, that's one of the things I think I wanted to instill was like that, like, as we talked about in the film, and what you saw in the film is like movement has meat on it. It's like movement has to have that labor in it. For me, in Trisha's work, it has to have a real clear source of the labor, and also I tried to really inform them of like how the vocabulary developed, and like all of those parts that we just talked about earlier, so that they have all of that to play with, that there's no time for them just to reproduce movement, because they're too busy with they're too busy reproducing history.
it was an amazing experience, this reconstruction, for us to start this together. And then Lance continued to visit throughout the year. It just felt really, really rich to have two of the most extraordinary original cast members. And I think one thing I was saying earlier, like Di and I have been there for years, processing through so many like details or this, that, archive, and it's wonderful. But Lance came back, and there was this amazing feeling with Lance that he had just been working with Trisha 2 weeks prior, because he had such a clear muscle memory and mind memory. And I had an amazing experience one day when we were teaching. Lance was teaching some of the soft phrase from 4A. And like, I think we've taught it so many times, and it starts to, you know, get like detail oriented and maybe like sort of closing. And he came back and he's like remembering it. And I really felt like his information jumped into my body. And I felt like I was doing it with so much depth again. It was a really special experience, that like muscle memory can jump, and it was really amazing for me. So I feel like the dancers really got a really beautiful, beautiful information with so much quality from knowledge and physical, and mining the archive a bit more. Now that it's digital, it's easier to pinpoint things that might be useful, but you don't have to get stuck on it. So it was a lovely year prepping for the season at the Joyce. Yeah.
Well,
It will happen.
Yes, I think that's probably a brilliant place to have us wrap up, which is just to say it will happen. We will have this season at the Joyce. We will celebrate Trisha's and, well, the company's 50th anniversary and Trisha's legacy with the company as soon as we can, and as soon as we can be back in the room together. But I want to thank you all for the work that you did to get us to almost there. and also the just personally, it's been, I mean, all of us, it's been so rough, and these conversations have been so uplifting for me to get to return back to the work and why we are doing the thing that we're doing, and watching it all kind of unravel and thinking about how to rebuild it. It's ultimately because we serve the artists and the dancers who have inspired us and who are full of this incredible and in some ways unbelievable creativity. I still watch these dances and you all dancing in the film, and there's something that's, I'm gonna say, both like magical and miraculous about what you all do. And it's still just super inspiring and kind of mind-blowing that dance just occurs, that people can do these things with their bodies. Like, you are indeed my superheroes and valiant as ever. So thank you for being here, for making the time and creating space for us to have this conversation. And I look forward to being in a room with all of you as soon as we can, and to have an audience and invite that audience in to be in a room with these works again.
Thanks, Aaron.
So be well, all of you, and all of yours, you and yours, and we'll see you very soon.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye, guys. Have a great day.
Take care.